It's called the pilot graveyard. It's where AI initiatives are buried. Great ideas that just never made it. Right now, insurers across the industry are running more AI pilots than ever before. But here's what the vendors won't tell you. Most of those pilots will never make it to production. Not because the AI failed, but because nobody planned for what happens after the demo works. Hi everyone, welcome to the Equisoft Accelerate series. Thank you for joining today's session, What Nobody's Telling You About Agentic AI Implementation in Life Insurance. We're excited to present an in-depth conversation between two industry experts who are going to cut through the noise around agentic AI in insurance. Today's speakers are Fabio Sarrico, Senior Insurance Analyst at Celent, where he advises insurers globally on core system modernization and emerging technology adoption. Fabio brings an independent analyst perspective on what's actually working in the market. Ghassan Karam, AVP, Product Management at Equisoft, with years of experience helping insurers navigate the intersection of legacy systems and modern AI capabilities. Ghassan is responsible for the Equisoft Manage AI native insurance platform, which recently achieved luminary status in the North American and Latam Celent Life Policy Administration System Report and won the Celent Award for Advanced Technology. Together, they're going to explore the real challenges facing insurers, from legacy integration nightmares to the architecture decisions that separate expensive AI experiments from actual success stories. All right, let's get started.
Hello, Fabio. How are you?
Hi, Ghassan. Nice. What about you?
Very good, very good. I know you're big in the industry, and I know you're always on the lookout and writing great reports in the industry. I had maybe to start with, I want to ask you a question around some of the fake news around AI. So, as you know, there's a lot of fake news about what's really going on with AI. Maybe if I ask you, what are the trends that you're seeing, considering this? What are the real trends behind the scenes? And how are insurers really investing in agentic and AI?
I think the best way to approach this is to separate, I guess, the narrative from the reality, because I think there's a clear gap right now. You know, the narrative is that AI, and especially agentic AI now, is already transforming insurance end to end, and the reality is that I think it's a transformation is starting, right? So there's still uneven and concentrated, and it's still concentrated in a specific area. So I think a very timely data point that I can bring you is that at Celent we do annually what we call dimension survey. Basically, we survey CIOs of insurance companies about their priorities in terms of IT investments, the key drivers behind those investments, as well as the barriers to achieve their goals and so forth. And of course, we need to add a lot of questions around agentic AI in general this year's survey. I'm going to bring some data from specifically the life insurance side in North America. We have that for other regions and for PNC as well, but I think here I'll concentrate in that. So, what the survey shows, which we just published the report a few weeks ago, is that Gen AI is no longer pilot only, right? So we got an interesting number. 61% of the surveys, the people that were surveyed, they said they are already investing in AI, in Gen AI, sorry, and another 31% plan to invest within the next 2 years. So, if you put those two numbers together, we look at what, I guess, 92% of the market, right? So Gen AI share of AI in ML budgets as well have been growing. So when you talk about 2025 to 2026, the differences, I think an interesting data point is that it has pretty much doubled. So the Gen AI investment coming from their AI budget has doubled from 2025 to 2026, and this is very true across all segments of insurance companies. So when we talk about the tiers, right, small, mid, large insurance companies, it varies, but all of them are in the same trajectory. So investment is real and it's accelerating. I guess that's one true, not fake news there. And now when we look at the agentic AI in more details, we see it's important to see that the next layer of evolution. So what I mean by that is that we're seeing two key shifts. First, it's moving quickly into the mainstream as a strategic priority. And second, is this the real signal, right? Budget allocation is ramping fast. like I was mentioning. So the conversation is moving from can we use Gen AI to, I guess, how to operationalize, if you will, decisioning through agentic systems. And that's where the reality starts to become more clear, I guess, in my view. Most production use cases today are still concentrated on efficiency. I think that's important. Things like submission triage, document processing, data enrichment, internal copilots and things of the sort. And they are valuable, but they are not actually optimization plays. They are optimization plays, but they are not really doing the transformation when you think especially about growing, right? So they improve through they don't fundamentally change how insurers perceive or act at risk. That's what I'm trying to get into. And I have done some research on this, that the very nature of risk itself is becoming more dynamic. So but on the other hand, most AIs are still being applied to optimize a static process. So, like, to try to finalize and get to your final question, I think what has changed from 2025 to 2026 in summary is that insurers have moved from experimentation to operationalization at scale. And that's where they are hitting the real constraints, which are integration, governance, auditability, and model risk management. So the short version is AI is progressing fast, but most of the industries is still, focused on the efficiency mode, not in the transformation mode, if that makes sense to you.
That makes perfect sense. And one thing I capture from what you just said, which I find to be interesting, is now governance is suddenly sexy. So
Yeah.
it used to be that thing that nobody cared about, but somehow I think it's a good measure, in my opinion. The ones that are focused on governance, I feel they get it. They get it a bit more, right? They understand that this is the most important part that you need to be focused on today, because if you really want to transform, you need to tap into the data sets. And if you want to that data sets, your governance become crucial, especially in the age of potential IP leakage, potential and an area
Yeah.
of our industry that is extremely regulated. Well, not an industry, in industries as a whole. This is an industry that is highly regulated. I find this to be very interesting. I also feel I would add to what you said is, so obviously you go to a lot of conferences and I do as well. And AI is a big, I'm glad to see your statistics, and I can confirm that I've seen this as well, is that trend of Gen AI materialized to some extent. It's interesting to see people thinking of decisioning with agentic. I think this is where we're going.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of low-hanging fruits, those easy use cases. They tend to mislead you a little bit because they're easy to do, but they put you in a position where you're getting like what we call confirmation bias, and then you feel you're advancing very quickly, right? But the reality is that those decision use cases require you to tap more into the governance layer of your data and all these stuff. But
Promise come and go, right? So many fall short in our industry, like I said. And how does the agentic AI promise compare, for instance, to RPA promises?
now, going back to your robotic process automation, just to define for people that are listening, what is RPA? Robotic process automation is an automation of workflow that is more deterministic than actual probabilistic in nature. You're actually tapping into a specific workflow that are driven by legacy systems, and you're like automating. It's the equivalent of, like, maybe to put it in simple terms, equivalent of getting a robot do the actual work so that you don't have to transform your previous systems, and you keep them where they are and you automate your workflow. That was a promise, I think, what was it, Fabio? 10 years ago, that was a big promise. We were in
Yep.
this and everybody was excited about it. And then it promised to change the world, and no more migrations of system and so on. All it delivered, I mean, it delivered some value in some cases. I don't want to be over negative here, but it actually caused more problems, in my opinion, because people didn't focus on where they thought it was going to solve a problem that they could have solved otherwise. Now, that's the story of robotic process automation. Now you ask yourself, to your point, is there a gap here? I come from an actuarial background, so how about I look at the numbers, right? How many made it to production? And you see that not a lot of moving from POC to production. There's a lot of issues out there. So for people listening, like, obviously you might be asking yourself, well, I've seen that demo of that person and my team that showed me a proof of concept somewhere, and somehow that proof of concept, it was an exciting thing that I've seen for a while, and now nobody's talking about it. Where did it go? Well, there's a gap between what you see today and the put it in production. Do I believe that this gap is gonna realize itself the same way RPA will? I don't think so. I think this is a real promise. I think though the speed to production is overhyped a little bit. I think this is where the gap right now of the promise is. The speed to production, because there are a lot of areas you need to solve before you can, going back to Fabio, to your point, before you can let it take the decision, right? And think about it from sometimes it's always easy to think of a problem, simplify the problem, and think about it in real life. If you're hiring someone today to do underwriting, are you gonna let him make the decisions without overseeing their decision the first couple of months, first couple of years? Are you just gonna give him the keys to the castle day one? If the reality is no, it's pretty much the same thing with agentic AI. Once it starts able to make decisions, what is the process around keeping up with it? What is the promise around retraining it? What is the process around adjusting its values? Especially, again, going back in a regulated market. Now, if you go back to the robotic process automation vendors, they're also bolting AI on top of it today. So you can say, well, this is the solution now. Now they're solving the problem. I think the question is deeper than this. You need to understand, to do this properly, you need to understand the industry. You need to understand the actual aspect, the regulatory aspect, the product complexity, the regional differences. And this needs to be molded into your system, into your process. So I'm thinking more and more, it's less of a technical problem. It's a business problem. So to do it, you need the business sitting in the room. You need your vendor to become kind of your accelerator, your business expert as well. And then you can work with that. So where's the promise gap today? This is where it falls today. It promises to make changes in production, and you see it in conferences today. While I would argue that it's not there yet, and there's still a way to go before we are there. But we're making progress.
I really like that. Yeah, and I totally agree. And when you bring up the business domain knowledge, I think that's crucial. And we see that more and more, right? And we can talk about this in different categories of software and technology in the industry, and how we see that those nuances that you mentioned, and not even just the industry domain, but like you said, the difference among regions, in between two countries, and so forth. So I think then when we do advise insurance companies a lot of times on selecting technology, we always take those things, as not a minor factor. Indeed, it's a crucial one in our view. So I couldn't agree more with what you just described.
One of your article writes about architecture trap. So can you maybe explain that, what it means, why it matters for insurance when they're evaluating AI solution? I think that'd be an interesting point of view to hear it from you directly.
Absolutely. And when I talk about this architecture trap, what I'm trying to describe, I guess it's a structural limitation that many insurers don't see at first, or at least that's what I've been seeing. So the idea is, it's actually quite simple, is that AI is being introduced into environments that were never designed to support it. So there is a problem of fit in there, right? So there are a few ways that this shows up. So, first, I guess we can think about decisioning. It's kind of trapped inside systems of record, right? So even if you introduce AI, it's constrained by batch processes, triggered by static lifecycle events, and it can't really respond dynamically. And I guess it's kind of counterintuitive in that matter, right? So second, like when you're introducing probabilistic AI into an environment that I guess we can classify as deterministic. So I think this creates, that kind of tension, that kind of black box models in a regulated industry, like you said, with no traceability of why decisions are made or changed. And then you get into, obviously to the control problem, right? AI generates outputs, but there's no clear human in the loop design, no override logic, or no escalation path. So this is where the architecture decision becomes crucial, so you do not fall into that trap, right? Because insurers are often choosing between embedding AI inside the core or layering AI around the core. And when we see is that when AI is tightly embedded, it inherits the limitations of the system of record that it's placed within. So the trap is not just technical, but I would say it's also on the strategic level. And that's crucial because I think a lot of times everybody says, right, oh, technologies is an enabler. But in real life, a lot of times we see that there's not a clear alignment between the strategy and the technology modernization. And this is crucial. It cannot be just a matter of semantic, right? You need to apply that in real life. So you ended up investing in AI, but placing it in environments where it cannot really, flourish, adapt. And it's consistent with where the industry is investing. So like if I bring again the data from the Dimension survey, I guess I would say a good news is that when we look at the top priorities in terms of investments within the insurance companies' portfolios, differently from what we were seeing, for instance, in the a few years ago during the pandemic, that a lot was concentrated front end. We see the opposite now, like a lot of concentration in back end and core systems, so policy administration, billing, and other core modules. They are remaining as top priorities in the past few surveys that we have done. So the core stays central. The real question is whether decision stays trapped in that core or it's allowed to evolve outside. And and it's just that's why this matter when evaluating solutions. Again, like I said, it's not just does this platform have AI? It's where does the decision live, and is it designed to evolve continuously or only at predefined moments?
There's the technical architecture, which I fully agree. Like even at Equisoft, we've designed our agentic AI services to be highly interacting with our policy admin, but it's sitting outside the policy admin. But sometimes people tend to think, okay, well then just take any framework and plug it in, and that's gonna work. Well, you go back to the previous question where we discussed the issues. Right? It's not that wouldn't make it production ready because you need to design the decisioning around the feedback, around the industry, around the you have to realize that a decision that you make today, people realize that, but the technical people need to realize that the decision you make today in underwriting in 20 years, you might want to audit it because you want to see what's happening on this policy. What was the decision taken? Well, what if an AI agent took the decision, you didn't have traceability in place, and you cannot explain why the decision was made? Then your quick POC doesn't serve you well in this case. But based on what you just said, I fully agree, especially on the part where you remove it from this central system and you put it outside the central system, and you also relieve the contamination between both systems. You have a highly probabilistic system and you have a very deterministic. And when I say deterministic, some people tend to say, well, yeah, deterministic can be probability. Yes, it is probability as well, because you're putting rate tables that are based on probabilistic table. But the reality is that if you give it the same values, same input, it's giving you the same output always. That system of record, that's what it is. The probabilistic depends on the context. It's going to change. So sitting those systems outside of each other gives you a system that is resilient and secure, so that if you have a process that is highly secure that you don't want to contaminate, then you don't plug them together and you're safe. It's about your vendor understanding also your reality and building around your reality. So that is something to be on the lookout for.
But how is this really applicable going back again into our industry, to insurance specific? Is it really out of the box, as we tend to say? How do you see that?
Great question. I think this is the one I battled a lot, even internally with my team. Sometimes we would battle with this because, like, vibe coding is this thing. I don't know if people are familiar with vibe coding, but vibe coding is someone downloading a cursor or Claude code and asking it to build the software very quickly, and suddenly you feel you have it and it looks. And this is where the human mind plays games on you. Like there's that thing we call confirmation bias, where you feel you're ready to go and let's put it in production and let's do all these things. Today, this exists a lot, right? So today, frameworks are out there. You have AutoGen, you have Crew AI, you have LangGraphs, and so many out there. Anyone with a bit of understanding of technology can go download these open source framework, put them on their computer. If they know how to do Python, they're gonna watch a YouTube video, and next thing you know, they're able to ask it to do stuff, use AI to generate AI code, and next thing you know, oh, it looks like a Ferrari. So now you're ready to go, right? Well, that is the risk here, and these are the frameworks, but now here's what's missing. It's not integrated. It doesn't integrate well with your core systems because some of them are legacy. It doesn't understand the business itself. It understands that use case that you were working on. It's overfitted for it. Explainability is not there. So the full explainability, the tracing. Human interaction and human feedback is not embedded in it. Reliability because of lack of production and IP leakage is a high risk for you because now you're having a system that has been built by AI. You don't know which library it's used. It just decided to use any library, import it, and then boom, you have the system. So that needs to be checked. No out-of-the-box fundamentals of the industry in it. So let's say you're doing underwriting and per state, and then you have state legislation. This doesn't exist in it. It doesn't have a module to capture this. It doesn't have a way to consume this information and be able to reflect it. And then you go to the more technical problems. What do you do with drift? How do you measure drift, for example? That thing, when you put it up and you start using it, with time, all these LLMs, if you're using ChatGPT or Claude, you're going to see that the version is 1.267, and then every now and then it will tell you, relaunch it, there's a new version. So you click relaunch, it restarts it, there's a new version. Well, one of these versions might change the behavior of the LLM. How do you measure that? You're putting something, you want to put something out there. How do you measure all these things? You need to measure drift, you need to measure consistency of the response, and you need a way to operationalize this. So meaning now when something hits and you start deviating, the same way today when you have a critical software that you have a production support team that gets a notification, they wake up at night, the first person is called, they wake up at night and connect to fix the problem, or the backup is going to get their call, pager duty, for example. Well, that's the case. We've solved this because we've been doing software for years. Now here comes a new transformative industry, and we take just to your point, just a framework that solves like 5% of the problem. The 95% is around how do you put it in practice. It wouldn't be the same if you're doing lead generation. Let's say you have a website, and all you're doing is you're trying to sell, I don't know, toners, for example, printer toners. And now you need to lead generate. You want someone that clicks on this, you want to capture their information and search for them on Facebook and see and calculate a score if they're a good fit. Well, I mean, if it doesn't do a good job, you're not going to generate leads. If it does a good job, you're generating lead. This is measurable. There's no impact. That is a great fit to picking a framework and patching it because you don't care really. But now we're talking about an industry that is not like that. So we have to be careful in looking at these framework as all they can really provide is to give you a visual of what is possible. But that is not at all what you're going to end up with in production. And there's a lot of efforts to get to where you want to go. Fabio, what is the difference between AI native PaaS systems and AI ready ecosystems? What's the difference?
I think I would frame it like this. An AI enabled or AI native PaaS is a meaningful step forward. But it's still fundamentally a system of record. And here is one analogy that I make very often, which is, I see the policy administration of the core systems as the heart, right, of make an analogy with the human body, but not a cognitive layer, right? So this is the same thing with, we can see and we can use many examples. We can talk about underwriting, right? So we see the emergence of underwriting workbenches. That's what it is. It's acting as the cognitive brain of underwriting within that, system, which the core is the heart. Because I think fundamentally, policy administration modules, for instance, they were developed to manufacture policies, right? To store policies, to enforce rules, to maintain consistency. And again, like we talked before, I guess we use the term, it's deterministic by design, right? And AI, on the other hand, is probabilistic, like you said. It must be context driven. It must be adaptive. So even when AI is embedded into the past, it's still operating with a system built for stability, not adaptation. I guess we mentioned that before. So that's where the idea of an AI-ready ecosystem comes, because in that model, the past becomes the memory, and decisioning moves outside the core. You introduce, I think, one concept that I talked about a lot in nowadays, especially when I mentioned before that I dedicate a lot of my research in terms of evaluating how risk has been transforming, and the need to interpret risk in real time, and that comes very aligned with event-driven inputs, right? You need to observe signals. So, and then you need orchestration across systems and continuous evaluation. So you need to observe signals and continue in a loop evaluating that. And this is where we start to see even like the concept of what have been talking about coreless modernization, right? So we just published a report that we call Decoding the New Best of Breed approach, which is looking at the accelerated best of breed approach, which is basically a strategy that we see gaining traction where you deal with the legacy issue in a different way. Instead of the usual big bang, you have also the alternative of slightly modern, or gradually, better said, modernizing around the core, or even a hybrid, right? You can do the replacement, but you have a hybrid of self-development with point solutions. But regardless of your strategy, is that concept of the past being the heart, the system of record, the deterministic solution, while you have this cognitive layer where intelligence and innovation is actually happening. So it's not that easy to explain, I guess, but that's where I'm trying to get. So the difference is not just technology, is where intelligence lives. That's what I mean. And increasingly, intelligence needs to live outside the system of record to truly adapt in real time. It's different from the concept of having AI applied in the core system for efficiency in other areas. That's totally great, and we've been seeing this more and more. But here we are talking about AI driving decisions. So I think you need that. That's kind of my view.
Maybe when we got the Industrial Revolution and we started building cars, for example, when we were building Ford days, we were trying to create a deterministic process out of humans. We were putting everybody in a chain, and you put a screw, and you put the piece of metal, and then you put this on top of it, trying to think of the humans as pieces of machinery that replicates the same process. And we kept making the process simpler so that you can get the same output at the end of it. But then obviously today we're using machines to do that because machine will actually do a better job every day. We are probabilistic creatures. The policy admin system, to your point, is a deterministic system. It just keeps the record. To your point, put where agentic AI outside of it, put it exactly where the humans interact. And one thing that you said that I really, really like is around the event-driven architecture. Because a couple of years ago, everybody was talking about event-driven architecture. It was like the next best thing. And everybody was talking about publishing events and business-driven events, and all systems interact with it. And then I remember 3-4 years ago, I was giving a talk in conference, and someone asked a question, and they were super right. They were like, yeah, that also promised a lot. It turns out that's a nightmare. Because now, just if a couple of events are not business driven, now people are replicating the same event. You end up with a web of events, and you're back to square one. So it started falling out of fashion. Agentic AI goes back to the top because you need it to work. So sometimes things can be painful, but if it's the ROI, if all it's providing is real-time integration and you can do it via APIs, why worry too much about it? But if that event-driven architecture gives you the ability to get a web of agents working actively in an intelligence layer, then it's worth it to go through the pain. So I'm thinking what you're saying is very interesting because this is highly efficient and required for our industry to operate.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And I've been, making that point in previous research, and how, again, like I said, I think there's a key point in terms of having to interpret the world in real time and responding in real time. And you cannot be trapped into an architecture or a model that thinks in days, weeks, or months, right? You need to try to operate as near as possible to real time, and also to interpret those signals and be driven by events. So like you said, it's not an easy task, but indeed I see it as a necessary one, especially like you just said, with the implications and development of technology sometimes just it recycles the interest in previous ones, right? So that's quite interesting. What would look like actually, a customer experience strategy related to AI strategy? How do you see that?
That's a great question. I think this is one of the most underlooked areas of agentic AI today, I think, and this is something here at Equisoft we're highly focused on. And let me clarify maybe the way I'm answering the question from the perspective of the way I see it. Your AI strategy, when you're talking about AI strategy, is how you're bringing intelligence to all your processes. It could be your front office, your back office, your middle office. It could be your underwriting, your claim adjudicators, your agents, your customer service representatives, your actuaries. You need to bring intelligence across the board, right? And I'm talking now on the product side, like of the insurance product, but there's other areas in your business where you like your accounting team, chatbot, that's not what we're covering. So when you think of AI, sometimes so again, we've spoken about a couple of things today. We've spoken about putting it inside the past system. We said, yeah, that's fine. It gives you a little bit, but you need to make sure that the intelligence and decisioning layer sits outside. But now that thing sitting outside, the next question is it headless? Is it just a microservice that is headless, or does it have a user experience? Does it have a way to interact with it? And I'm a strong believer that it requires a user experience. It requires a way to interact with it. It requires its own UI, even though it interacts with everything. And that, maybe a good analogy is think of like Gmail, right? So you can have the best email engine, but if you don't have a nice user interface, then all this thing is you can't interact with it. Like so the user interface, and with any software this is required. But especially in the age of AI strategy, think of your underwriter for simplicity. You're taking a process where you're doing it in their workbench, where they're doing like the whole underwriting. Let's take in a good order check, for example. You're doing your good order check, and they're going in, and now you're putting a process sitting outside that is interacting with the core system where you're doing your underwriting. And what you're doing is that now you're completing, you're reading all the documents, and you're submitting your requirements based on the documents, whatever is missing. Now that's great. If you think of it as like a headless system, it's just going to do it and you're done. But what if you don't agree with what you're seeing? What if you want to review more details? What if you want to audit it? What if you want to go and like have that AI agent that worked is like a mini human. It's a workflow that did some work. You need to interact with it the same way you need to interact with the people you hired. You need to have a UI where you open it, you train it, you give it feedback, you talk to it, you tell it, like that case, I disagree with your judgment. It also needs to gather information from the world, like the underwriters accepting your proposal or not accepting your proposal, changing it. That's one piece of information. But we cannot take this for granted. You still need to way to interact it, because there's in your day-to-day job, I hire you, I'm the lead underwriter, I hire you. I put you to start underwriting policies. Someone is going to tell you in the organization, I disagree with what you did here. That doesn't mean that they're right. They might both be wrong. As your manager, I want to review that case with you. I want to give you the feedback. That user experience is required. That experience as a whole is required for you to be able to gradually improve your AI and to put it into production. And these are the things we talk about when we talk about your AI strategy is not a headless AI strategy. It has to come with a way where naturally you feel we have to be able to replicate what the workday of this world are doing with like, but now we're talking about AI. We're talking about AI workflows, agentic workflows. We're talking about specific AI agents. That's where we're going with the industry, in my opinion.
No, I think that's super interesting. And myself, I focus a lot on underwriting, and I think, this is also I fully agree with the aspect of the human there, because the way I see the impact of AI in the underwriter's role, like you're talking about, I think it's very interesting. It's by not by any means replacing the human underwriter. Like what I see is that AI arguments the underwriter role. Actually, it brings it to its essential. It actually removes a lot of, task heavy, and it removes, I guess, it removes the underwriter from that gatekeeper position into more orchestrator of protection. So I think, and that's the role of underwriting, the role of AI in underwriting. That's what I see. So I see a lot of potential, and as you know, AI and especially agentic AI can be much more efficient in so many tasks and argument everything in terms of decisioning for the underwriter. And that's where we see going. And when we talk about where AI is today, efficiency versus decisioning, in underwriting in particular, I think it's very interesting. We see, like, when we talked about underwriting workbenches or solutions of that sort, the almost all of them can help with the efficiency side, right? Summarization of documents, data ingestion, etc. But it's really on the decisioning process, helping the underwriting making better decision with agentic AI, with AI, is where we see the solutions that are actually differentiating from the others. So I guess that's the next level. So
Yeah.
I fully agree on that.
Something that comes up a lot, like let's say if we address it, like data comes up a lot. Some say it's the biggest barrier. Others say it's overstated. What's your take?
Well, I'll try to be more direct on this answer. So, I would say the debate around data is slightly misframed because data is important for sure, right? What feeds AI, for instance, since we're talking about this, but it's not the only, data quality is not the only real bottleneck. I think the challenge is, not, of course, is not availability. There are lots that, it's even the other way around. There's much more data than now. The problem is going from noise to signal, right? So that's the challenge, and we see that it's how decisions are made around data that I think it's very important, and it's whether the organization is structured. Again, I couldn't emphasize this more. Act in near real time, right? So this is crucial in my view, and actually bringing again the CIO survey data from North America Life Insurers. The good thing is that we see the CIO's priorities in 2026 reflects that 55% of them are investing in internal data, AI capabilities, and third-party data models. So, more than half. So the industry is funding data. The issue is this, I think is decision design. So for example, are explanations built only for regulators? We're just trying to comply with the, what is needed, or we are also taking this for operators and customers, right? When we talk about customer experience, do people trust the system enough to act on it? Like you're talking about the trust issue. Are there clear override and escalation paths? So because if those elements are missing, even good data, if we manage to get good data, if we got to have a source of truth, it doesn't necessarily yet translate into action. And AI outputs don't get the use that they should. So this issue is not just data quality. I think it's decision transparency and trust. And if people don't trust the decisions, it doesn't matter how good the data is.
One thing that I find very interesting is I think there's to some extent there's like a secret data wall that I feel is present out there because of these use cases, right? We're focused a lot on operational efficiencies to your initial point, like those cost reduction cases, document summarizations, all these are require never like they don't require a tremendous amount of data. They just require you to make sure you're using LLM that is secure and you have like a agreement with your LLM provider and you're good to go. But where I start seeing the problem also happening is that as you want to move forward with these bigger cases, if you're an insurance company that has a traditional warehouse where you're only keeping up with structured data coming from your core system, you're only ever ingesting 15%, keeping 15% of your data. And all the material that is interesting from documents, from emails, from chats, from decisions, all these are sitting on storage account that are inaccessible and ungoverned. And these data are tough to govern already because you cannot predict where PIIs sit, where PHIs sit. So they're tough. Having the ability to consume unstructured data is not as easy as it seems as well in the industry, and people need to do an active effort because some of these decisions that you want to make with agentic AI require you to consume a big quantity of unstructured data. So now you start hearing people talk about lake houses, these are the areas where performance is a key, but also the quality and the type of data that you consume changes. And I feel that this is a barrier as well. Data, like, would you agree? Like, this is kind of a barrier for those heavy use cases, heavy lift use cases, decisioning use cases, and growth use cases in the future.
Yes, I do. I think that's a very good add-on into what I just said in the beginning. I fully agree with you,
Yeah,
and I think that leads us to an important aspect, which is use cases, right? So like that you
yeah,
just brought in terms of data. So you know, when we try to think, insurers, they tend to come with a specific use case, right? And then and automation. So it's in good order checks. And so how do you tell them when they come to you as from Equisoft perspective about the journey that is very crucial, that is from the proof of concept to production environment for those
absolutely.
specific use cases?
That's a So for example, here at Equisoft, to give you just a bit of insights, we're investing in a lot of use cases in claims and underwriting and customer service. And like you just given the example like of good order check, that's one of the use cases we're actually built and we're implementing as well. So if I focus on that use case, how do you bring it to production? This is a great question. We've had this debate so much because we have a very nice demo that I can show you how we can order the requirements from an application itself. Um, but so to go to production with this, first and foremost, you want to shadow. You want The way we operate is we take these agentic AI and we shadow the humans. So every process that's done by the human is done also by the AI, but the AI is not doing anything at the beginning. We implemented it, we trained it, we deployed it. We measure drift and consistency always. So when the first batch of information that it's trained on, that becomes its baseline, and we're measuring drift against it. Every time it answers, every agent when it fires, we have AI reviewing AI for consistency in answers. We make sure the versions are kept up, and we make sure we have a production support team that is able to react if we start deviating. But that's one aspect of it. That is the technical aspect. From the aspect of human interaction, at the beginning, we're shadowing. So you have one champion, let's say, in the organization that is looking at this, and they're able to see what is the delta between how humans are interacting now with the AI. That's the first layer of measure. And then we start sprinkling it in. You're going to take a cohort, you're going to start deploying it, say, now it's going to make recommendation for you to approve. And these humans are going to be assisting. And that's going to be, so what you want to do is the same way you're training a human to assist, you want to measure. And what you're measuring is not only the quality of the answers of the AI, what is the human interaction with it? Because something that is underlooked heavily in production readiness is how are your employees going to react to that? You have to be very sensitive about giving the perception of you're trying to replace them. Because in my opinion, you're going to be able to do more with the people you have and improve on quality. We're not going to start firing people and letting people go and replacing it by AI. That is not the objective. And I've lived through that experience myself in the actuarial field, where I used to work at a smaller firm. I moved to a larger firm, and I've seen a lot of the things that I used to do in Excel are now done by a software that is offshored. So I felt for a second, am I going to be obsolete? I realized that no, my work is still the same. I need to be more of an expert and review the work. So it's like everybody's going to become a senior, but we're going to be able to do more, look at more metrics, look at um, more pieces of information that can help us predict risks better. That is where the game is going to be played, not in reducing the workforce. We're just going to improve on loss ratios. We're going to improve of efficiency. We're going to lower the drop-off rate because the time to underwrite is going to shrink so much. And we're going to be able to give better protection. We have to remember we're in the business of protecting people. I'm sure if you ask a lot of people today, how many are protected? How many have life insurance with kids? You're going to realize the number is very much lower than we think. people don't feel the urgency like when you drive a car to go get insurance. This is where we're going to be focused at the beginning. But to take these use cases into production, you have to take a gradual approach, and this is our approach. We take a gradual approach and we put back the human in the loop in terms of the human feelings and emotions in the loop, because if you don't have adoption from your employees in using that AI, because there's a perception you're trying to replace them, the advice they're going to give the AI is not going to be the right one, and that AI is never going to get better at doing their job. So you need to be careful on that front.
Yeah, no, there are many layers on this. Yeah, I think, and especially us at Celent, as we manage so many, we have insurance companies, we help insurance companies with so many, large transformation scale projects, and of course the human side of things, right? The change management is crucial and it cannot be undermined by any means. But I think also, going a little bit back to the journey from proof of concept to production, I think there are different levels that, I don't want to diminish the importance of proof of concept by any means. We here at Celent, when we do system selection projects for insurance companies, that's crucial. However, there are different, levels, right? So like you said, when you do a demo, it's, very high level. And then you go into proof of concept where you try to, to align that with real use cases from the client or from the insurance company. But also, it's not, the proof of concept to work is not the only hard part anymore, right? The hard part is also make it reliable and scale. So I think, the biggest, like we talked before about, the biggest gaps is around drift and performance over time. So because models work in controlled environments much better than in production, right? In production, it's more of the real test. So data challenge, changes, behavior changes, context shifts. So, many insurers don't have I think sometimes a clear way to measure the drift, to monitor or respond to it. So, what happens is that the proof of concept may even look good, but the confidence, eventually drops and adoption stalls. So I think the journey is not only, that build, drop, build, deploy, and done. It's kind of like deploy, monitor, adjust, retrain, and govern, right? So
Absolutely.
I think it's a little bit more comprehensive than that. And so what does the path look like in that sense for you? Like, what is your view on this real opportunity of moving from, the efficiency to growth based on revenue generation?
This is a great question, by the way, and I totally agree with you. Everyone's looking at efficiency, and I think it's a natural process where it starts with the technicians. Technology starts with the technicians, and the technicians are usually more focused on efficiency because they're building the software and they need to make it so the efficiency use cases are the low-hanging fruits. They are the obvious ones. These are the ones that are quickly measurable, right? The ROI for an efficiency case where you say, from now on, I'm gonna review all my documents for underwriting with AI and summarize them. You measure this in a matter of weeks. Where the growth one, you need to deploy, test, measure growth, and then you need a good amount of time before you feel you've achieved it. So that's maybe one of the reasons why everyone is focused on efficiency. But I think growth is the game changer. This is when we're gonna move from everybody's getting a bit more efficient and one company is winning more business than the others. And how do I think we achieve this? I think, first of all, we need to keep doing what we're doing, keep pushing, but we need to be very strategic about it. It needs to be embedded in the executives of insurance companies to think about AI, data governance, data as itself, data availability. But also, this is when we start combining technologies. For you to achieve growth, what do you need? You need to assess, predict, and execute, right? There's three areas that you need. I need to assess from the context an opportunity, that there is a potential data the potential for an opportunity. I need to predict the opportunity, and I need to act on this opportunity. What does this require you? It requires you to take as much information first that you have, data, we call data, first that you have. It could be a phone conversation, it could be anything that you've had. That is your unstructured data. That is, if you're not doing any data governance, any data work, unfortunately, you're not getting this data. So you're stuck. So once you get all this information in, that's the first step. Second step, you need to run predictive modeling That is not the Gen AI and the Chat GPT of this world. That is the traditional predictive modeling. We do, for example, work around dynamic clustering with the random forest models. It sounds highly technical. It is a neural net, the same that are building the Chat GPTs today, except we're using one of them. In a traditional machine learning, predictive modeling, we call this advanced analytics, and we predict. So what we're doing is we're predicting now that that customer might be eligible for that rider or for that other product. Now we've done the prediction, and that data could come from unstructured and structured data, chats, phone conversation, and other areas of information. And the third one is the execution part. Now I need to reach that person. This is where agentic AI, Gen AI are extremely handy. I can look at previous conversation to assess the style. I can prepare an email. I can call an API to the portal of the agent of that and tell the agent, I detected an opportunity. Here's an email that you can write. Just click, copy, you paste it in your email, and off you go. You just generated a lead. That is the growth opportunity, but this requires you to solve a lot of the under the hood issues that you need to have today to set yourself up for that future, because this is where we're traveling. This is where we're going. Growth, winning more business, understanding more your customers, and figuring out how to upsell this business. What do you think?
I agree. I think, bringing back to, I guess, my comfortable zone of underwriting, like I think what you just said, from data prediction answered by, analytics, I think it's when we think about moving from efficiency to growth, like I mentioned before, if we take that into the operational lenses in underwriting, for instance, right? So that's where you move from static decisions to dynamic interventions. So what I mean by that is like underwriting starts to behave less like a point in time decision and more like a continuous process, of course, driven by data and AI. So like, for example, dynamic, underwriting based in real-time signals. Again,
Yeah.
of course, enabled by event-driven architecture, or contextual cross-selling triggered by risk changes, right? Again, the technology is there for that now. That can totally drive growth. And also, we always know that, retaining a client is always cheaper than obtaining a new one. So when you look at, retention, you can have retention driven by risk prevention, for instance, right? So those are all areas
Absolutely.
where AI starts to impact growth, not just costs. So to get
Yeah.
there, however, you need real-time context, you need flexible decisioning, and the ability to act continuously. So otherwise, we stay in the efficiency mode, which is where most of the industry still is today. So that's kind of my view.
No, that's great.
And
So
I think now, yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I was gonna actually ask you a question about that. I wanted to see if well, a lot of insurers are probably listening right now and thinking, okay, but where do I actually start? What's my next step? And what's your advice? I mean, you have a lot of knowledge clearly on this matter, and you write a lot of articles. I'm sure they would benefit from your advice. So if you can give them a piece of advice and where to start, that would be great.
Sure. I think I can continue building on what I was saying. Like, I think where to start can be less based on use cases and more about your ability to support continuous decision. I can't stress this enough. So, because that's where most AI initiatives break down. So first, an architecture that can respond to events in real time or near real time. Second, it's the experience, right? So you need the customer experience capabilities that can act on AI output. Otherwise, you generate insight, but you can operationalize it, right? So, and if you want a practical starting point, look at where, insurers are already investing, for instance. You see, like I was mentioning, and it's been already the second year where we see underwriting workbenches being extremely a big priority within the investments. We see portals for a long time already, communications layers. So we start by modernizing those decisions surface, I would say, and connecting them into event-driven layers with strong governance. Like you said, out of the sudden it becomes a sexy topic, right? So and that's the third one. So after I talked about architecture, we talked about the experience, and then we talked about governance. So, clear human in the loop design, like you were saying very well previously, so you can have accountability that needs to be in place from day one. That's, very important. And finally, expectations. So this is not a quick implementation. It's an evolution over time. And I think with the developments of technology, even when we think about, legacy modernization, we need to think more of a capability, not a projecting in upon the time, right? There's not like before, oh, here it starts, here it ends. It's continuous improving that the architecture and that technology framework. So I think start with, are we structurally able to make better decisions continuously? I think that's the strategic question. And because of the answer, sometimes is no, AI won't transform your business. It will just automate its current limitations.
Start with the business priorities and outcomes. Don't focus about technology first. What problem are you solving? What's the measurable impact that you're after?
Mm-hmm.
These are first and foremost. I think this is not only true for agentic AI and Gen AI, this is true for technical problems as a whole, but this one is even more emphasized here. From the perspective of governance, start looking at governance from day one. I've been in a couple of conferences where we discuss governance heavily, and I felt a lot of the insurance companies were doing very creative things. And I think some of the debates is AI governance, where does it fall? Which executive is going to take over AI governance? Is it the CSO? Is it the CIO? Is it this? And that was very interesting topic because at the beginning I was like, what is it? Is it who's a turf war here? Or but no, they were active questioning because governance is seen differently than the way it's not it's not an auditor question. It's a technology question now. It's not the same. So where does it fit really? That was a huge question that was asked. And I felt the debates, just listening to a couple of executives debating, they had very good points, as in executive sponsorship for AI governance is extremely important right now. It needs to be taken seriously. It's not a turf thing. Who's gonna take more control over the other executive? So that's another one. Deal with your employees' fear of losing their job. I mean, they sit in meetings, they are excited about what they hear, but behind the scenes they're probably worried about that perception. And if they are worried, and if you give them this perception, and sometimes it could be but just in one meeting saying one word taken out of context and then expanded upon, and you're never going to hear about it, but suddenly you have a workforce that is worried about losing their job. If they're worried about losing their job, they're going to try to protect it, so they won't adopt that technology. So you need to really deal with this. And then access the data, we talked about that, so I'm not going to expand on this, obviously, but and look at your vendor as well. I mean, you can't build everything from scratch, right? And your vendor is your accelerator. It needs to understand insurance. Don't replicate the robotic process automation mistake, promising end-to-end, delivering task level stuff. No, you have to look at your vendor. Do you understand insurance? Or are you just giving me workflow system, and then I need to figure out all the rest, how to integrate and how to put the logic in it. So dig around that with your vendors, because they are your partners more than ever in this technology. They're not just like a technology vendor that provides you software, you pay them a SaaS fees, and off they go. They need to evolve, they need to understand the industry, and they need to be actually investing in the people that are industry focused and not technology only focused, because this is where the game is being played right now. So I think with what you said, I think that is a good set of advice. If a couple of them can be achieved after this meeting, I think me and you we've done great.
We
But
accomplished our goal. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, so listen, that was a pleasure talking to you, Fabio, as usual. Before I thank everyone, which obviously I want to thank everyone for listening and joining us here. And there's going to be much more of these, so they can always join. But I want to ask you, you talked about, right? You wrote a report, you published a report recently on coreless transformations and maybe other reports that you're working on. Do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about these reports? And I'm sure people are going to be interested in writing them, reading them. I've seen some of them and I've heard you speak, and I felt that was something from someone in product strategy, that is something that is very impactful for me, that I focus on for my decisions. So please go ahead and tell us.
Thanks for the question and the nice comments. And first of all, yeah, it's a pleasure being here, collaborating with Equisoft once again and with you. And yes, I think throughout our conversation today, I kept mentioning reports, right? So the survey with CIOs, my research on quarterless modernization, on underwriting modernization, on the very change of the nature of risk. So all of those contents are produced by Celent. In those cases, they were all my reports, but I have colleagues across the globe doing the same in other areas. And they are all made available to our subscription clients through our Celent.com portal. So they can download those reports, and they can also, beyond having access to those reports, they can also talk directly to us, the analysts behind those reports, so we can kind of personalize that information into their specific needs. So I think that's actually where the great value that we can bring is at. So at the very end, what we are trying is to, or our goal, our mission is to help insurance companies to make better decisions around technology and their strategy, and make sure that those are both aligned and that they do not have to invent the wheel, right? We are dealing with vendors and with their peers all the time, and we can always leverage something from the experience that we have. So that's kind of the idea there. And thanks for that question. And of course, we are available for anyone that is interested to talk in more details about this. And I would like also to thank the audience, everybody here. Hopefully this was useful to you guys. And Ghassan, thank you once again for the opportunity.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Fabio, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you both for that insightful discussion. Before we wrap up, we'd like to invite you to get more insights into life insurance insurer transformation by listening to the Life Accelerated podcast created by Equisoft. Every month, host Olivier Lafontaine explores the transformations being undertaken by life insurers from Mutual of Omaha to New York Life. You can listen at equisoft.com to our Life Accelerated podcast or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions for Fabio or Ghassan, you're welcome to reach out directly through email. Thank you for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day.